and gentlemen, I present to you the Marshall Silver Jubilee 2553 head and matching 212 cabinet. This amp works really great for me, so I'm going to talk about how I use it. This is not a comprehensive review slash demo. It's just my experiences with this amp and how I like to use it, how it fits my style. And if you're wondering why the camera's jumping around a little bit, it's because I'm trying to hold it selfie style like all those cool kids in their vlog videos. But I think I might be getting a little old for that shit. Before I get into the things that I really like about this amp, I just want to go through the front panel real quick so you can see what those controls are. I think they're pretty straightforward, so let's take a look. So on the control panel, we have the usual power switch, standby switch, but we also get the extra little output switch, which is high and low. I've got it switched to low right now because in this room it needs to be kind of quiet, comparatively speaking anyway. And that allows the amp to sound a little bit better at a lower volume because it supposedly cuts the output level by about a half. Moving across, you have your usual presence, bass, middle, treble, output master. Then we have a lead master for switching between your clean and dirty channels, and then input gain, which is basically how much distortion. But I run it on the dirty channel all the time, and I don't really ever switch it. I don't like to switch channels. I like to leave it where it is and try to basically mimic the sound of just a little bit more angry version of a plexi, basically. So I run all the knobs pretty close to noon. The presence knob I turned down to about 3.5 or 4. The output master depends on how loud I need to be on the gig. It's down a little bit right now just because I'm in here. All right, let's take a quick look at the back panel of the amp. On the far left side, there's a foot switch jack. Then there's the send and return for the effects loop. The DI, which could be used to power another amplifier, re-amplify this amp into another power amp and cabinet for, say, a stereo situation. Or if you wanted to separate a wet-dry effects type setup. Then you got the, of course, the speaker outs, a pair of those. Output selection of impedance. So this is an 8 ohm cabinet, so I'm running at 8 ohms. Main selector for voltage, and then of course the fuses and your standard power cable. Okay, I wanted to mention about 5 things that I really like about this amp. First of all, the tone, I think, is really right there in the tradition of the classic Marshall sound. It's a little bit hot-rodded, and you have a little bit more gain on tap than you would with a plexi. And that's really, the Super Lead is my kind of all-time favorite amp. But I think if you dial this back just a little bit, you get right in that neighborhood, especially when you turn it up loud and the power tubes kind of kick in on it. So totally feels like home to me. I've always been a Marshall guy, so it really fits with the kind of sound I go for. The next thing is that you get that little extra range with the preamp, so it's kind of like having a plexi that's been hot rodded a little bit. It's a little more compressed, definitely, but it has just that little bit more kind of aggressive sound, so that's kind of a cool thing. And then the next thing I would say is that the effects loop is really good on this amp, and I think it's the best pairing of an effects loop with a preamp of any Marshall that I'm aware of. Certainly any Marshall I've ever played. And that's, well, there may be some of these kind of more technically advanced later Marshall models that work really well, but for me, I like the old school sound. So as far as the amps that really kind of sound more like the Marshalls that I grew up with. This amp really does that sound and retains that really a clean effects loop type of sound. So if I, this is the sound of the amp with nothing in the effects loop. But if I kick in a little bit of reverb, you can hear how clean that reverb tail is. And it doesn't splash on you the way some effects loops tend to overdrive a little bit too much, and the gain structure is really hard to really get balanced right. So I've had a number of different Marshalls with effects loops, trying to get that right sound, and for me, the Jubilee series is really the only Marshall that I've had the success with the effects loop and getting that little bit more old school sort of punchy sound that I really like. So yeah, the things don't splash around on you. If I put a little delay on there, you can hear that delay tail in there. And it sounds real nice and clean. It doesn't just garble up on you the way it would if it was overdriving too much in the effects loop. So then another thing that I really like about this amp is just the size, physically, and and of course the weight of the amp. So for years I took the full size 412 and the 100-watt heads. A lot of gigs I would play two 100-watt heads and two 412s on the gig, and I would run a separate, like a wet-dry type situation, and it was real complicated because I wanted that classic Marshall sound, but I wanted some effects, because in a small room sometimes it just sounds so dry and kind of painful and harsh. So to have that option, I had a really hard time getting that like I wanted it, but these amps really do that well. It's a great compromise. I mean, nothing's really quite like playing a Plexi or an old metal panel 100-watt from the early 70s even, which is really my favorite to play as far as just great tone. But when you want that little bit of reverb or delay to try and make it sound a little bigger in the room and not quite so harsh, you really benefit from having some way to do that without having to carry this huge rig around with you. So to me, this was a really great combination and a compromise for that, because I feel like I'm still getting the sound I'm after. So that marriage of this particular preamp with the effects loop, the way it's designed, I'm not sure technically about how that was, why that seems different to me than it does on other Marshalls that I've had that had effects loops. But for some reason, I've had two Jubilee amps, and the effects loops were superior to any other Marshall, classic style Marshalls that I've had that had an effects loop in them. Purists will say, well, you shouldn't do that anyway, but I went that route for many years, but I'm really happy with this compromise of what the Jubilee can do and still retain such a great tone. Now, then again, about the physical size of the amp, the 212, it matches and it looks right. It's not a weird looking setup where the head doesn't look right on the cabinet or something like that. They did a great job of making it look like a Marshall half stack that's just been shrunk in the dryer. Or maybe, if you're standing in front of it on stage, it almost looks like it's further behind you than it really is. So I think that's a really great look. It's the classic look. But I love this size. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, Marshall has not reintroduced or reissued this particular setup. But I have heard the newer ones. On that note, I have heard and played through some newer ones, and I thought they sounded absolutely fantastic. So, if you're in the market for a Jubilee, the reissues are certainly worth looking at. Or the reissue of the Jubilee series it sounds great. I really thought they sounded like they should. But I wish they would put out this particular combination so people could see how great of a club amp this is. I love this amp so much. I've played every rock gig I've had since I bought it about a year ago, little less than a year ago, probably 10 months ago, something like that. For years and years, I played the 100-watt super leads for decades, really, and a whole bunch of other Marshalls over the years too. But when I bought this amp, I've just loved it so much for that particular application. I still love to record with the super leads. I love the sound of them. They're great. But as far as getting in and out of my car without tearing the back seat up and being able to make it in and out of the club without being dog tired by the time I set everything up, this is a great compromise, and it is 50 watts, so it's still going to get super loud if you want it to be, so there's no problem there. And a couple of more things that I would tack onto that I really like about the amp is when you need it, that DI is really handy. So if you wanted to use this amp and you did want to expand the setup and maybe run a wet-dry, it's a lot easier than it is on an amp that does not have a wet-dry or does not have a DI that you can just plug into and get that tone and reamp it into your next amp. And then another thing about it is that the high and low power switch that I mentioned as I was going across the front panel, being able to turn it down a little bit and get that great tone at a lower volume is really handy for when you're recording at home. And it's really handy for like in a video like this, or if you want to use it for teaching and stuff like that, or just want to practice with your sound. I do find a lot of benefit to practicing with a tone at least a certain amount of time that would be like what I would use on a gig. Like most people, I will always recommend that you practice with a clean sound when you're working on technique. But when you're working on your expression, you do kind of need to use a tone that is going to be pretty close to what you would use on a gig, because a lot of times that tone is the sonic environment that you actually create that expression within. So definitely keep that in mind when you're working on that. All right, there's some of the things that I really love about this amp, and I can't say a whole lot about the amp that wouldn't be positive, but if I wanted to nitpick it, I would say that I'm not real crazy about the 75-watt Celestions that are in the 212 cabinet, and I might change those at some point, because I'm more of a greenback kind of fan. I like that warmer sound, a little bit more rounded mid-range and highs. But aside from that, there's not much I can say. It's a little more compressed maybe than playing a 100-watt head, or even any non-master volume type Marshall. So if you can, those amps, if you're in a situation where you can run them loud enough, that's the ultimate sound. But in a practical situation, it's really hard to beat this 50-watt Jubilee setup. So I hope you enjoyed checking that out, and if you like this video, click like and subscribe, and I'll see what I can do about making more of them. I believe that Fraser is dreaming that you will click like and subscribe.